The sound of alarms echoed through the ship, shaking the very walls. Selena stood in the midst of chaos, her heart pounding as the rogue soldiers breached the outer defenses. The humans, her supposed enemies, were now her only allies. With plasma, blades flashing and the roar of battle around her, Selena and Captain Adrian Cole fought side by side, their lives intertwined in a desperate struggle for survival. But when the final shot is fired, and the dust settles, will peace truly be possible? Or will the bond forged in fire be shattered by the very war they fought to end? One decision could change everything. Stay tuned to find out what happens when two enemies become allies, and how far they'll go to protect each other. If you're new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. The throne room was quiet, but the tension in the air was palpable. The princess stood tall, her long silver hair cascading down her back like a waterfall of starlight. Her golden eyes, usually filled with confidence, were now full of disbelief. She glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of the warriors, nobles, and courtiers who stood like statues, not daring to speak. Even the air seemed heavy, as if the whole universe held its breath. Emperor Darius Khayan, her father, sat high on the stone throne. His face was calm, almost too calm. His expression gave nothing away, and yet his words cut through the silence like a blade. "You will go with the human," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority that only a ruler could command. Selena's heart skipped a beat. She had heard her father speak with such cold determination many times before, but never like this. Never about something so personal, so unforgivable. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to hold it steady. "You are giving me away?" She could hardly believe the words that left her mouth. To a human? To our enemy? The Emperor's eyes did not meet hers. Instead, he looked at the floor, as if avoiding the gaze of the one person he should have been protecting most. "We have lost many in the war," he explained, his voice softer but still firm. "The humans have lost many as well. Now they ask for peace, and they ask for you." Selena's chest tightened. She felt a mix of anger and betrayal flood through her. She wanted to scream, to throw herself at her father, to demand that he take back his words. But she knew better. She had learned from a young age that the Emperor's decisions were not to be questioned, not in front of the court. The princess held her tongue, but the bitterness in her heart grew with each passing second. "I am not a thing to be traded," she hissed, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. The Emperor, unmoved, glanced at her with a look of finality. "You are a symbol," he said, his words ringing out in the stillness. "A symbol of peace. They will not trust our words, but they might trust you." Selena stepped back, her hands trembling. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him that she was not some pawn to be used in a game of politics. But the words didn't come. She knew it would do no good. Not here, not now. The Emperor's gaze softened slightly. "This is the only way to bring peace," he added. "The only way to end the war." The princess wanted to run, to escape from this nightmare, but she stood rooted to the spot. She could not believe this was happening. Her father, the man who had promised to protect her, was giving her away to a human enemy. Her whole life, she had been raised to believe that the humans were barbaric, cruel, and untrustworthy, and yet here she was, being sold as a symbol of peace, as if her value was only in what she could offer to their cause. "When do I leave?" she asked coldly, her voice now a controlled, sharp edge. She could not afford to show weakness, not in front of the court, not in front of her father. "Now," Darius replied. The heavy doors of the throne room creaked open, and Selena's heart pounded in her chest as she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. A human, a soldier, a captain, the one she would be forced to accompany. She lifted her chin, straightened her back, and walked past the court without another word. Her eyes burned with the sting of unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give her father the satisfaction of seeing her break. Outside, standing in the shadows of the open door, a tall human man waited. He was dressed in a simple uniform, his dark hair cut short, his eyes like quiet storms. He stood silently, offering no warmth, no words of reassurance. Selena's gaze hardened as she saw him. Captain Ryan Cole. The Emperor's voice broke, the silence again. He will escort you to their world. Ryan stepped forward, bowing his head slightly but not too low. His respect was measured, not exaggerated. He did not look at Selena as an enemy, but she saw only the man who had fought against her people. She could feel the anger rise in her chest, but she bit back the words. There was no point in arguing now. You will regret this, she whispered under her breath as she walked past him. Ryan did not respond. He simply followed behind her, his footsteps light and steady. They walked through the hallways of the palace, past the statues of her ancestors, past the rooms filled with memories of her childhood, her home, her people. All of it, left behind. She did not look back. She refused to. When they reached the shuttle waiting outside, she stepped onto it without a word. Ryan followed, and the door sealed behind them, the hum of the ship's engines filling the air. The shuttle was smooth and sleek, its exterior covered in strange symbols Selena didn't understand. It was cold inside, but there were no chains, no guards, just soft lighting and clean seats. There was no hint of captivity, only an eerie calm. You are not a prisoner, Ryan said after a long pause, his voice calm and neutral. You are free to speak or not. Selena glared at him. You are my enemy, she said. I will never speak to you. Ryan nodded as if he expected that answer. His eyes never left hers, but he said nothing more. He sat in silence beside her as the shuttle lifted off, carrying them away from everything Selena had ever known. As the shuttle moved further from Ulara, Selena's mind raced with questions, with doubts. She was a symbol, her father had said, a symbol of peace. But peace came at a price, and the price was her freedom. She clenched her fists. The fire inside her had not gone out. Not yet. The shuttle hummed quietly as it carried Selena farther away from her home, from everything she had ever known. The cold walls of the small ship seemed to close in around her, and the vast expanse of space outside the window only made her feel more alone. The stars twinkled faintly, distant and uncaring. Her heart felt heavy, as though it had been left behind on the planet she had just been forced to leave. Captain Ryan Cole sat across from her, his dark eyes calm and unwavering. He said nothing, offering her the space she clearly needed, but Selena could feel his presence. It was unsettling. He was her enemy, and yet he seemed so human, not like the cold, cruel creatures she had been taught to fear. Do you plan to speak at all? Ryan's voice broke the silence, a quiet murmur in the stillness of the shuttle. He was watching her closely, but Selena kept her gaze fixed on the small window, unwilling to meet his eyes. She refused to acknowledge him. No, she answered curtly, her voice sharp with defiance. I have nothing to say to you. He didn't respond immediately, and for a moment Selena thought he might push further. But he didn't. Instead, he returned to his quiet seat, his posture relaxed yet ready. The ship's low hum was the only sound that filled the empty space between them. Time passed slowly. Every minute felt like an eternity, each one stretching, longer than the last. Selena felt the weight of her situation with every passing moment. Her father, the Emperor, had sent her away like an offering to the enemy. She could still hear his words echoing in her mind. You are a symbol. A symbol of peace. It made her sick to think that her life was now being used as a token in a political game, traded for peace between two warring species. She had never imagined her life would come to this. As the Princess of Ulara, she had been groomed for greatness, to lead her people to victory, to glory. But now she was nothing more than a tool in her father's plan. He had traded her for peace, and she had no choice but to play the part. Ryan, on the other hand, was quiet. Too quiet. Selena glanced at him for the first time, her sharp eyes studying him. He didn't seem like the ruthless warrior she had been taught to fear. There were no signs of arrogance, no sense of superiority. He didn't carry himself like a conqueror. Instead, he seemed almost resigned, as if he had already made peace with the role he had to play. The shuttle jerked slightly, breaking her thoughts. Selena's gaze shot to the window. They had entered the human fleet's territory. The distant stars now seemed more organized, more structured, and the ship's movements became smoother. She had no idea where they were headed. Her mind raced, trying to anticipate what would happen once they arrived. What would her future look like? Would she be a prisoner, a guest, or a hostage? She glanced at Ryan once more. He was looking out of the window, his face illuminated by the soft light from the shuttle's control panel. His expression was unreadable. Despite everything, he remained composed, unaffected by the tension that gripped Selena's heart. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice a little quieter this time. She wasn't sure why she asked. Perhaps it was because she needed to know, or perhaps because she wanted to break the silence that had stretched too long. Ryan turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers. "To the human fleet," he said simply. "To Earth. To the negotiations." Selena didn't respond. The words felt hollow. Negotiations. As if this were some sort of formal exchange, like trading goods or signing a treaty. But to her it was much more than that. She was being handed over, her fate sealed by her father's decision, and she had no say in it. For the next few hours, the journey continued in tense silence. Selena couldn't sleep, her mind racing with thoughts of escape, of defiance. She wondered if there was any way out of this. Perhaps she could fight her way free, find a way back to Ulara. But she knew deep down that it wouldn't be that simple. If she tried to escape, she would be caught, and then her father's deal with the humans would be meaningless. Ryan continued to remain silent, seemingly content to let the journey unfold without further conversation. At times, he glanced at Selena, his eyes soft with a mixture of curiosity and respect. He did not view her as a prisoner, and that confused her. Why didn't he treat her like an enemy, as she had been taught to expect? Why was he treating her like someone worthy of respect? The thought lingered in her mind as the hours passed. She could not understand him. He was a human, after all. He had fought against her people. He had been part of the war that had cost so many lives. And yet, here he was, traveling alongside her, as if he were just another soldier on a mission. No anger, no hatred, just calm professionalism. Eventually, the ship began its descent toward the human fleet's flagship, a massive vessel that loomed in the distance. The sleek design of the ship contrasted sharply with the cold, utilitarian style of the human fleet. It was a symbol of their strength, their unity. Selena's heart tightened as she realized they were about to land. She could no longer escape her fate. She was about to step onto a human ship, a world she had never imagined stepping foot on. And the worst part was, she didn't know what awaited her there. As the shuttle touched down and the engines hummed, to a stop, Ryan stood up, his movements fluid and practiced. "We're here," he said, his voice low. "Welcome to the human fleet." Selena's gaze never wavered from the door as it slowly opened, revealing the cold, metallic interior of the human ship. The ship was sterile, devoid of any warmth or comfort. It felt foreign to her, a stark contrast to the palaces and chambers of her home on Ulara. This was a world of machines, of people who had no idea what it meant to live with honor, to live for something greater than themselves. "Are you coming?" Ryan asked, looking over his shoulder. Selena took a deep breath, preparing herself for the unknown. She stepped forward, determined not to show any weakness. "Lead the way," she said, her voice cold and resolute. And with that, her journey into the unknown began. The days aboard the human ship were long, filled with silence and uncertainty. Selena had spent most of her time locked away in her quarters, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. The bitterness she felt toward her father's decision was still fresh, but now something else began to creep into her heart. The fire of defiance. that had burned so brightly at the beginning of the journey was beginning to flicker, fading as she observed more and more of the humans around her. Adrian Cole, the human captain, was a constant presence on the ship. He was there every day, and despite the tension between them, he never pushed her. Instead, he treated her like a guest, respectful but distant. He brought her meals, gave her updates on the ship's progress, and made sure she was comfortable in her quarters. But his kindness, though genuine, was something Selina refused to acknowledge. It made no sense to her. He was her enemy. He had fought against her people in battle, had taken part in the war that had torn her world apart. And yet, here he was, acting as if they were equals. One morning, as Selina sat by the window staring out at the endless expanse of stars, there was a knock at her door. She didn't move at first, knowing it was probably just another routine visit from Adrian. But when the door opened, it wasn't Adrian who stepped in. A young officer stood there, nervously holding a tray of food. Selina couldn't remember his name, but she had seen him before. He was one of the crew members who had watched her with curiosity since the fire. Selina raised an eyebrow, confused as to why he was the one bringing her meals now. I thought you might want to try something new," the officer stammered, his eyes darting to the floor as he held out the tray. "It's a human dish. I thought maybe it would help you feel more comfortable." His voice trailed off, unsure. Selina stared at the tray, her mouth dry. She wasn't hungry, but something in the officer's eyes made her pause. He wasn't offering food out of obligation or as a way to gain favor. It was simply an act of kindness. "Thank you," Selina said quietly, surprising herself. She took the tray from his hands, her fingers brushing against his briefly. It wasn't much, but it was a small act of connection, a thread tying her to this strange new world she was now a part of. The officer left without another word, and Selina sat in silence, staring at the food. She had been so focused on hating the humans, so certain that they were the enemy, that she had forgotten how to see them as people. Not all humans were the same. She had been raised to believe that all of them were cruel, selfish, and heartless. But here was this young officer, offering something as simple as food without expecting anything in return. Selina shook her head, trying to push the thoughts away. She couldn't afford to soften toward these people. Not yet. She had been sent, away like a pawn in a political game, and her only goal now was to survive this journey, to return to her people when the time was right. A few days later, there was another knock at her door. This time it was Adrian who stood on the other side, his usual calm expression in place. He had become a fixture in her daily life, his presence constant yet unobtrusive. He had brought food again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't just a meal. It was an offering of peace, a gesture that Selina could no longer ignore. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice a mix of frustration and confusion. "You've done enough. I'm not your responsibility." Adrian's expression didn't change, but there was a softness in his eyes that wasn't there before. "You're not a prisoner," he said quietly, setting the tray down on the small table beside her. "You're a guest, and guests deserve to be treated with respect." Selina didn't reply immediately. She stared at the food in front of her, but her mind wasn't on the meal. She was focused on the word respect. It was the first time anyone had used it in reference to her since she had arrived on the ship. And yet, here was Adrian, a human, her enemy, showing her more respect than anyone from her own empire ever had. The days passed, and with each passing hour, something inside Selina began to shift. She couldn't explain it, but she found herself watching Adrian more closely. She began to notice the way he treated his crew, the way they respected him, not out of fear but because they trusted him. She saw how they followed his orders without question, how they looked to him not as a leader to be feared, but as someone who cared for their well-being. She remembered what she had seen during the fire, when Adrian had rushed into the flames to save his crew, without hesitation, without a second thought. He wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He wasn't the type to boast about his actions or wear his bravery like a badge of honor. He simply did what needed to be done because that was what he believed in. And yet Selina couldn't help but admire him. He was nothing like the humans she had been raised to fear. He was something more, something she didn't fully understand. He was human, yes, but he was also something more. He was kind. He was honorable in a way that defied everything she had been taught. One evening, after a long day of silence between them, Selina found herself sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at the stars outside. The vastness of space was overwhelming, and for the first time she felt a deep sense of loneliness. There was a soft knock at the door, and before she could say anything, Adrian entered. He didn't ask if it was okay, he just stepped inside, his presence filling the room. He held out a book, one of the human books that had been left for her by the crew. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. "You might find this interesting," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "It's a story about a warrior who learns that peace comes not through force, but through understanding." Selina took the book from him, her fingers brushing against his for a brief moment. She looked up at him not with hatred, not with suspicion, but with something else, a feeling she couldn't quite name. "Thank you," she said softly. Adrian gave a small, knowing smile. "You're welcome." He turned and left. But this time, Selina didn't feel anger. She didn't feel hatred. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to this journey than she had thought. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she had believed. The hum of the ship had become a constant in Selina's life, a reminder of the journey she had never asked for. For days she had remained in her quarters, her mind a battlefield of emotions and confusion. She had been sent away by her father, handed over like a pawn to the humans. At first she had been determined to fight, to find a way out, to return to Ulara and reclaim her place. But over time, something inside her had changed. The fire of defiance that had burned so fiercely was now tempered by something else. Something she wasn't ready to acknowledge. It had all started with the small acts of kindness from Adrian Cole. He had never treated her as a prisoner, never tried to break her spirit. Instead, he had treated her as an equal, something she hadn't expected from the enemy. His respect, his care, had begun to break down the walls she had built around herself. And though she still felt anger, still felt the sting of betrayal, she could no longer deny the bond that had begun to form between them. But the peace they had started to build was fragile, like a delicate thread that could snap at any moment. One day, as Selina sat alone in her room, a sudden alarm rang through the ship, its shrill tone cutting through the silence. The lights flickered, and the walls shook, as if the very ship itself were under attack. Selina's heart raced. She had been through battles before, but this was different. This was her new reality, and she didn't know what to expect. Without thinking, she sprang to her feet, her warrior instincts kicking in. She had been raised to fight, to protect her people, and she couldn't sit idly by while the ship she now called home was under attack. She ran out of her room, the noise and chaos of the ship ringing in her ears as she sprinted toward the command bridge. As she moved through the hallways, she saw crew members rushing past her, shouting orders, and scrambling to their stations. She followed the sounds of the commotion until she reached the heart of the ship. There, standing in the midst of the chaos, was Adrian. He was shouting orders, his voice cutting through the noise as he coordinated the crew's defense. Selina's heart tightened as she saw him. His calm, composed demeanor in the face of danger was something she had come to admire. He was not like the human she had been taught to fear. He was something different, a man of honor, a man who would do whatever it took to protect the people under his command. As she stepped forward, she saw the enemy. A group of rogue soldiers, heavily armored and armed, had breached the outer defenses of the ship. They were making their way through the hallways, and the crew was struggling to fight them back. Adrian's eyes met hers as she approached. "Stay back," he ordered, his voice firm, but there was something else in his eyes, something that said he didn't want her to get hurt. Selina felt a flicker of anger at his words. She was no helpless princess to be protected. She was a warrior. "I'm not staying back," she snapped, her voice sharp. "I'm here to fight." Without waiting for a response, she moved toward the enemy. Adrian called after her, but she didn't turn around. She couldn't. This was her moment to prove to herself that she was still the warrior of the Serene Empire, that she was still capable of fighting for what was right, even if that meant standing alongside the humans. The rogue soldiers were fierce, but they were no match for Selena's combat skills. She moved through the hallways like a shadow, her plasma blade flashing in the dim light as she took down one soldier after another. Her body moved with the fluidity of someone who had spent her whole life in battle, each strike precise, each movement calculated, but she wasn't alone. Adrian was beside her, his own weapon drawn as he fought alongside her. He was quick, efficient, and deadly in his own right. They moved in sync, covering each other's backs, anticipating each other's moves. It was the first time Selena had fought beside a human, and she couldn't deny that the bond between them was becoming stronger with every passing moment. The battle raged on, but there was no hesitation in their movements. They fought as one, their determination matching the chaos around them. As the last of the rogue soldiers fell, Selena stood in the midst of the wreckage, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. Her clothes were torn, her body covered in soot and blood, but she had done it. She had fought and she had won. Adrian stood beside her, his own body marked by the battle, but his expression was one of quiet respect. "You fought well," he said, his voice low. There was no pride in his tone, no triumph. It was simply a statement of fact. Selena looked at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You didn't have to fight. You could have stayed back, safe." "I didn't ask for safety," Adrian replied, his gaze unwavering. "I asked for the people I care about to be safe. That includes you." Selena's breath caught in her throat. She had never heard him speak like this before. There was no anger, no bravado in his words, just the truth, simple and raw. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She had spent so much time hating him, resenting him for what he represented. But now in this moment, all of that seemed so distant. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice quiet. "You've shown me a side of humanity I never thought existed." Adrian smiled, but it was a small, knowing smile. "You don't have to say anything. You've already shown me who you are." The two of them stood there for a long moment, surrounded by the wreckage of the battle, their bond solidified by the blood they had shed together. There was no grand celebration, no cheering from the crew. The only sound was the hum of the ship and the quiet breathing of the two warriors who had stood side by side in the heat of battle. It wasn't peace, not yet. But it was something else, something real. As they turned to leave the battlefield, Selena knew that the road ahead was still uncertain. There would be more battles, more challenges. But for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't alone, and neither was Adrian. Together, they would face whatever came next, no matter the cost.